Yeah. All right. The question was asked. Now, where do we put the answer? I think we're well versed in this now, yes? So, I'll just write that down. The question was asked about how do I know it's God rather than spirits? And it might seem like a tricky thing, but it's actually very easy to know whether it's God rather than spirits. So, what gifts did God give to you? Just as a, what gifts? Free will. So these are the gifts God gave you. Free will. What else?
Conscience.
Well, conscience, yes.
Senses.
How about life? Senses, yes.
Soulmates.
Well, is that a gift to you?
That is use.
It is you. I wouldn't call it a gift to you.
Guides.
Sorry?
Guides.
Guides, yes.
Guardian.
Guides, guardians.
Our bodies.
Yes. Why is the bodies a gift?
Love. So we can experience life.
Well, let's lose the mic, shall we? Because otherwise nobody will hear. So whoever said bodies? Yep.
So we can experience life through the bodies.
Correct. So that's why the bodies have senses, right? So you can experience life, gather experiences, and obviously, what else? Yep. There's something. All of these belong to your soul. And then the soul has senses of its own, doesn't it? So those senses I'm referring to as soul senses. Yeah, gift of emotion. Why is that such a good gift? Well, just why is emotion a good gift for a start? Can we just anyone want to say? Yeah, anything?
Stops us being robots.
Yes, but it's not just that, is it? If you think about the use of your emotion, if every experience was just an intellectual one, imagine how, ordinary.
Makes life worth living, I guess.
Yeah, emotions are, you get to feel things and experience things emotionally. Isn't that a lot more powerful than just having a memory record of the thing?
Infinitely.
Yeah, so it's a part of your joy and your happiness, isn't it, to have emotion. Emotion is a good thing. Yeah. Somebody said desires. Yeah. Passions and desires. I'll keep it on good. Desires, passions. These things are also like emotions, aren't they? Without these, life would be a lot more dull and boring, wouldn't it? Yep. So all gifts. Yep. Sorry.
Environment.
You might have to start using the light rather than
The environment.
the environment we live in. Yes. So you could say let's call it the universe, shall we? That's God's gift to you. Isn't it wonderful?
Oh.
The universe is huge, this huge thing, and yet God gifted it to the human soul to have experiences. Yeah? That's why the universe got created, actually. God created the souls first, and then God created the universe for the souls to live in. Yeah. Okay, so these are all gifts. You can see there's a lot of gifts, isn't there? Anytime one of these gifts is, you could say, contravened, then the person who contravenes it is not in harmony with the gift. So therefore it can't be God. So an example of that is if free will is contravened in an interaction with anybody, so it's a person or a spirit, if free will is contravened, then not in harmony with love. So God doesn't contravene your will. He doesn't try to manipulate your will, in other words. So when I say contravene, what I mean is if somebody is trying to manipulate your will, push you into doing things that you don't want to do, and you're in your own environment and they're trying to push you into things you don't want to do, even if those things are good to do, it contravenes free will, doesn't it? So God would like you to exercise your free will in a loving manner, but God does not force you to do that. God makes suggestions through the conscience as to what the loving things are to do. And God brings to bear influences, like guides and guardians are influences, to try and influence you into doing something that's good for you. But God does not manipulate your free will into doing things that you would otherwise not do. So God wants us to have a desire to do the thing rather than feel manipulated or pushed into doing the thing. Of course, a lot of people then go, well, why did God create laws then? Because don't the laws push us into doing things? Well, no, the laws have been created so you can survive, actually. So all the laws, if you look at the spiritual laws, so we go over here, you could say there's a hierarchy of laws, spiritual, emotional, sexual and physical laws that govern you. This hierarchy of laws has been created for your protection and happiness. So the physical laws have all been created so that you are able to survive Earth, for example, are able to survive the spirit world in your spirit body. The sexual laws are so you're able to survive relationships and able to survive a sexual relationship. Emotional laws are so you come to understand your feelings and your emotions and how beneficial they are in life. So all the laws have been created to make your life happier, not to restrict your life further. And all the spiritual laws are the same. They've all been created for these purposes. And of course, the spiritual laws are going to have the greatest effect on you. So an example of a spiritual law is there are morals that make something true or false. And the spiritual law, if it's true, it's going to benefit you. If it's false, it's not going to benefit you. So the law actually condemns the things that are false. And this is why you'll feel I'm quite outspoken in condemning things that are false. It's not because I am right, it's because God's saying to me, He's right, and if I want to live in harmony with what God says is right, I've got to do what's right. I've got to do what God says is right. And when I say got to, of course God gives me free will to choose differently, but if I choose differently, I'm going to numb out to the conscience, therefore detune from God's truth. I'm going to numb out from my ability to have a relationship with God as a result of that. And so it's far better if I just accept what God says is right and just lean upon my own ideas of what is right. All right, so looking back at this, these gifts. So whenever one of these gifts is contravened in some way or other, really what's happening is that the person involved is not connected to God. Right? So if someone's trying to detune you from a conscience, an example of that is that you might have a person who's a friend who and you're going out to dinner with them or something, and the friend says, oh, look at that person over there, you should go home with them tonight, And that would contravene the conscience, and your conscience might be going, oh, I don't know if I should. And the friend's going, yeah, go for that. And, you're being silly by not going for that, And so eventually you decide to go with it. Then obviously that friend is not loving you from God's perspective, even though they're encouraging you to do something that you think might be beneficial to you, they're still not loving you. And so that's an example of a friend contravening your use of the conscience, and therefore not really a friend. Anybody who sort of says you should risk your life. So you see this a lot nowadays, don't you, with young men in particular, where they go and do what you'd call or classify as dangerous things in their life, risky things. And in the process of doing a risky thing, so an example of that is driving a car recklessly, for example, being competitive on the road with your car, for example. That would be a risky thing, and that would contravene the use of the use of your life, actually. And so therefore you wouldn't choose to do it. Even though you might not be afraid, you still wouldn't choose to do it. So it's an example of contravening the purpose of your life. So there's many times spirits come along and say, oh, you should kill yourself, or you should harm somebody else. You know, these kind of things happen very frequently. So anytime the spirit suggests you should contravene the life of another, obviously can't be God, right? It has to be a spirit. And also a spirit in not a very good condition, obviously. With regard to your bodies, if a spirit encourages you to use your body in a way that's either dangerous to yourself or dangerous to another person, then obviously that spirit wouldn't be God either. In fact, God won't encourage you to use the body in any direction at all, because he encourages your soul to do things. And then, of course, your body will do things once you have the feeling in your soul to do them. But many spirits want you to use your body in different ways, and so they'll encourage you to, and that would be out of harmony with love, and therefore out of harmony with God. So, firstly, what this illustrates is, any time somebody suggests to you, whether that person's on an earth or in the spirit world, to do things that are out of harmony with the gifts you've been given and the preservation of the gifts you've been given, then obviously that person can't be God. So we've had many people come along to some of our seminars and go, oh, God told me to leave my family, and no, God never told you to leave your family. In fact, if you could hear God, God would be saying, you created a family, be responsible for it, especially in regards to your children. Right? He wouldn't encourage you to leave your family. He would encourage you if your family life was such that it was abusive, then through the conscience, God would say, you need to leave because this is abusive. But he would never encourage you to leave just for the purpose of some selfish endeavour. He would require, through self-responsibility, that you care for those people that you brought into the world in particular. Right? So, again, it's pretty easy to see whether an influence is relating to someone who's out of harmony with God's laws of love versus in harmony. Of course, the conscience is the most effective one, isn't it? But that's the question we're being asked. So we've got God and we've got us, which are two halves of a soul. And that one soul, that one unit, is what God wants a relationship with, the whole soul. And God created for the two halves of the soul a mechanism via which they can receive truth from God. And God also created for the two halves of the soul the mechanism via which they, where they can also receive love from God, right? Through the connection with the Holy Spirit. And those two influences that God has upon you are not, even God doesn't control you with them. What God's trying to do is go, this is what's available to you as my child. You have the choice. You can make the decision for yourself as to whether you want to receive those things or not. Right? And God's not going to force you to receive those things. But of course, it would be to our benefit to receive them. Yeah. So the question was asked, how does this child know that this person, this unseen person, is the person communicating with them, or somebody else who's also unseen, such as a spirit, right? Which is also one half of a soul communicating to you. How do we know the difference? Well, obviously, if we're sensitive emotionally, you can actually feel different people without them speaking. Isn't that true? Like, you can feel when a different person walks in the room, even generally, if you're sensitive emotionally. Most of you are sensitive enough emotionally to feel when someone's angry, aren't you? Like, they don't have to yell and scream that you can feel. They're pretty angry. You can feel that in them, right? So that you're sensitive enough to feel some emotion. The more sensitive you become with your emotions, the more sensitive you become to the feelings of other people, and therefore the more sensitive you are to somebody projecting something at you or giving you feelings that are out of harmony with God's standard of love, right? Now, of course, that spirit might be completely in harmony with God's standard of love. So let's say that spirit does have a relationship with God to the point where they are at one with God. Now, it's going to be a bit harder for you under those circumstances, isn't it, to tell whether the person is God or not, because of the feelings, the intensity of the feelings from that spirit will be quite strong, because they're in a much... Every sphere that you progress to, your emotional intensity around about 10 times the previous sphere. So when you're in the first sphere, emotional intensity of things is quite low, with the exception of some feelings like rage and fear and anger and those kinds of things. But as you progress, the intensity of you being able to feel emotion and express emotion intensifies. But of course, if that spirit is in harmony with God, he will not force his feelings upon you unless you ask for them. So that's a big difference, isn't it? There's a big way to tell that even if that spirit's out of harmony with God, he will try to force his feelings on you. If the spirit's in harmony with God, he will just have his own feelings for himself. Right? And he will only share his feelings with you if you invite him to. So you want to feel. So if you want to feel love from a spirit friend who's in the celestial heavens, you can ask to feel their love and they'll give you some love, but they're not going to give it to you unless you ask. So they don't force you to have an experience or make you have an experience that you weren't conscious of having. You understand what I mean by that? Like, to ask, you've got to be conscious of what you're asking for, don't you? And so therefore, if you're not conscious of asking for something but you got it, then it's highly likely you didn't get it from God or the spirit who's in harmony with God. Yeah, you got it from someone else. Okay, so there's many ways we can tell whether the person we're asking things from is from God, or we're actually receiving it from God or from spirits. But another thing we must say is that this is in relation to the gifts that God gave you. But what about what's inside of you that determines what happens around you? So, because to a large degree, you create your own reality, don't you, through what you choose to experience and what you choose to do with your life. Right? And when I say your reality, I don't mean God's reality about your life. I mean what you perceive your life to be. See, God knows the truth of everything that's happening in your life right now. Everything. He knows every relationship, every friendship. He knows the reasons why you have those friendships and relationships. He knows and understands it all. Right? He sees it happening as it's happening. He is completely aware while it's happening to you because he cares about every one of his children, so he wants to know, so he keeps an eye on you. Not a like a malicious eye on you or a creepy eye. But he keeps an eye on you in the sense of care, loving care. He does that for every child, whether that child wants a relationship with him or not. He does it for every child, no matter what the child's belief is. He cares for each one of you to that degree. He knows what's going on. But God also knows that while God's standard of the universe and what God knows is happening is not what you're aware of is happening. And the reason why that is because in your own soul, there are experiences from the past, and there's emotions from the past, and there's beliefs from the past, and there's intellectual ideas from the past. You can say facts from the past, right? You can say there's sensory things that you've experienced that you have from the past, you know, the awareness of past pain or awareness of past happiness or whatever. And you could say all of these things are your memories. And God knows that any memory that is painful that you're choosing to store in your soul is going to have a large effect on your reality as to what's happening around you, right? Now, God is also trying to help you understand all that. But any spirit who supports you staying in a state where your memories are not processed emotionally, that spirit is out of harmony with God as well. Because God knows that if you process your memories emotionally and let them all go, and you get to a stage where your memories are only an intellectual recollection of what occurred and no longer emotional in their status inside of you, and they no longer affect your decisions, your future choices or decisions. So any spirit who encourages you to stay holding on to your memories, so any person who encourages your nostalgia, you know what that is, right? That feeling that, oh, I'm connected to something in my history, you know? So any spirit who encourages you to stay connected to the country of your origin, right? To the family of your origin, and they're willing to do that and sacrifice principles in doing it, then any spirit who encourages you into that is not in harmony with God, because the reality is you don't have a country of origin. Earth is also not your place of origin. You know, God created you, and where you first came into existence was in the soul union state, in an unaware state. So that there's no country of origin. Your family is not your family, because every one of God's children is your brother and sister, and the only parent you actually have is God. Right? That's your family. So your family that you have on earth, you could say is a tiny little subset of your family, couldn't you? They're only a tiny portion of your family. So anybody who encourages you to do more for your family than any other child of God on earth, that person is encouraging you out of harmony with God's principles. So can you see from what I'm saying that God has a set of principles, spiritual principles you could call them, and anybody who encourages you away from those principles is out of harmony with God, right? And therefore not good for you. Yeah? Of course, none of that is the easiest way to determine whether something is from God or not. The easiest way, of course, is just you ask God through the conscience whether the person is God or not. Now, you've got to make sure you're asking God through the conscience and not asking through your emotional state of resistance. Because what that's going to do is encourage spirits to connect you, and the spirits connect to you in a different place in your soul than God. And they will make suggestions to you, and some spirits will make suggestions to you they are God, because they sort of feel like, some of them feel they are God themselves. Some of them feel that they are God's emissary, or some of them feel that they are helping you in life, and therefore it's good for you to believe they're God. But none of those things obviously can replace the issue of God.
There is a spirit from a lot of questions. There is a
spirit from Mary's side.
There is a question from a lot of spirits about what's the harm to them if they kind of intercede in this relationship with God. Some of them feel like they're trying to help people create a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you want to answer now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. What do you think would be the motives? So let's say this is what some spirits would like to do. They go, well, The people on earth don't have much of a connection with God. So here we are on earth without much connection with God. And here's God. And many of the spirits believe they know more about God. And so when you decide you want a relationship with God, by the way, not in a true way, but an addictive way, what will happen is oftentimes these spirits will connect with you, giving you the illusion you've got a relationship with God, to try and encourage you to have a relationship with God. Many Christian and Muslim spirits do this, but also many New Age spirits sort of do this as well, spirits who believe in those things. And then they sort of go, well, that encourages you in the direction you're going as a positive direction. In other words, you're thinking about God and they're trying to show you that's a good thing, that you're thinking about God. What do you see as the problem with that? Those spirits can answer.
Well, they don't see that's what their question is. They're saying, why is there a problem with that? If we're well-meaning.
Well, the first thing I'd recommend to them is to ask God whether there's a problem with that.
There's some of them, they themselves don't feel a connection with God and they're trying to help themselves and the people on earth to get a connection with God.
But the conscience works for anybody, whether they have a connection with God or not. So the easiest thing for them to do is to just, firstly, you've got to want to open up emotionally and just ask God, what is the answer to this question? Is it wrong if I misrepresent or I represent myself to others as you? How does God feel about it? God will transmit a feeling.
Yeah, so they're saying yes, that's wrong. Yeah, they can feel that's wrong, but they still can't see why it's wrong.
Yeah, but just open a bit more to the feeling.
I'm so keen on doing that.
Yeah, not so keen. You see, it's one thing that the feeling coming from God through the conscience operates. It influences you emotionally, and you can allow it to the point that there's just yes or no, or you can allow it to the point where it emotionally hits you. Right, and that depends on your emotional openness. So what's happening with these spirits that Mary's now talking with is that they've allowed it to hit them intellectually, but they haven't allowed themselves to feel it emotionally. Now they need to allow themselves to feel that emotionally. What is God's feelings about it is what they need to be able to feel. Because that's how God's going to share the truth about it.
Yeah, that it's a sin or wrong or
How wrong?
Really slippery. I don't really want to. I want you to tell them that I don't feel it.
That's right. The reason why is because it's one of the worst things you can do. Almost worse than anything else you can do. Like almost worse than a murder The reason why is that it damages the soul of the person by creating expectations in the person relating to this spirit rather than God. And so it's misrepresenting God's character, misrepresenting God's nature, misrepresenting the truth that God could share with the person. It also prevents the person from feeling emotions that deny their connection with God. And so therefore they can't establish connection with God because they've got a connection with His Spirit instead. And in the end, it's the whole idea of being a mediator for a person on earth between God and man is something God does not want anybody to do at all, ever. Mary and I are not mediators between God and man. Nobody is. God wants a connection with you directly. You're His child, just like I am. He wants a connection with you directly, right? Not anybody else. So when you start feeling from God how severe that issue is, it's one of the worst things you can do to a person is misrepresent God to them. Now, by stepping in and answering prayers yourself without being directed by God to do so, you are actually this person is not praying to God, obviously, because if they were praying to God, God would answer them directly, right? And the fact that you're stepping in means they're not praying to God. They've got some problem that's stopping them from actually praying in a real sense. Remember, a prayer is a passionate desire in harmony with God's love directed at God. That's what prayer is. A passionate longing for God to answer. So if the person is in a state of prayer but God's not answering, it means there's no sincere, passionate desire. None. A spirit stepping in is answering an insincere prayer from the person. So now the person thinks, I can be insincere with God and get answers. Right? It creates the illusion in this person that they're receiving things from God when they're not. Right? That's a very damaging thing to do. So from a spiritual perspective, a spirit stepping in and doing that is very damaging to the person on earth, but also very damaging to themselves. So those particular spirits who are involved in that, they know that as they're doing that, their condition darkens, and they haven't understood why it's darkening, but that's why.
And then their question is, what's the difference between us doing what we're doing and somebody being a guide?
A guide is just a person who recommends a course of action to a person on earth. And a guide is also assigned by God to help the person. So a guide is to guide the person in their spiritual endeavours, which is not the same as giving the person feelings that they interpret are from God, because that's trying to imitate God and misrepresent God. So the guide would only tell the soul on earth, like, here's a good place to go. Like, some of you are here because of your guides. In fact, almost everybody is here because of your guides, one way or the other, right? And the guides are saying, good place to go, learn a bit more truth about God, learn a bit more truth about relationship and so forth. But they're not saying, come here because Jesus and Mary are your mediator between you and God.
Yeah. So these spirits, they're pretty confused on that point, because they feel like, well, that's what we're doing. And even with this lady here, this is one of the spirits, he's saying, well, I felt like that's what I was doing.
Yeah, but let's ask God whether they are assigned by God to do
I
something.
know they know they're not assigned by God, but they think it's a good thing to do.
Isn't that a state of arrogance? It's like, I know what's best for the person rather than God does. Like, God's not answering them, and I think God should, so I'm going to answer them. Isn't it that? It's like saying some of you might email, like, Mary and ask her some questions and she's conversing with you, and then for whatever reason or whatever, I decide, like some person steps in behalf of Mary and starts answering as if she's Mary, right? Now, like, Mary and I never do that, right? We say, if, like, Mary and I have email addresses that are open to each other, but if somebody emails me and Mary wants to answer, should Mary say, Mary here? Here's the answer, whatever. Because to misrepresent somebody would be the wrong thing to do, wouldn't it? Yeah. Not God's standard of love, therefore not God. Not in harmony with God. The more you're in disharmony with God, you break God's law. The more you break God's law, the darker you get. Spiritually, darker you get. So every misrepresented, and isn't the misrepresentation of God probably the worst misrepresentation you could ever have? Isn't it? Yeah. Because it creates the illusion in this person on earth that they are connecting to God when they're not. It's very damaging to people on earth. We know people on earth who have passed into the spirit world and have been absolutely devastated because they thought their whole life they were connected to God, and they weren't. But they thought they were hearing from God that they were connected to God, and they weren't. Very, very harsh when that happens when you pass. It's like a huge shock. Yeah. Did everyone ask anything else?
No, they just got something to think about. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel very pleased. Yeah.
In a way, it's presenting a lie to the person on earth. And anytime you present a lie in the guise of teaching the person,
I guess some of them are asking, well, how do we get assigned by God? You know, how do we get, we think it's a good job to do, we feel like we're well intentioned, how do we get assigned by
ask
God?
God.
Ask God to assign them.
No, ask God whether they're ready to be assigned, even.
Yeah, they're sort of saying, well, how do we do that? How do we get ready?
You can ask right now. Am I ready as a spirit to be assigned to a person on earth to guide them?
No, so they feel like no, but then how do they get ready? So
Right, they're going to have to grow in God's standard of love to get ready. So they're going to have to listen to what God's standard of love is and start living in harmony with God's standard of love to get ready. As they know, there are many people on earth claiming to help people who are nowhere near God's standard of love and therefore not ready to help other people. Yeah. In the spirit world, it's often you intend to, you keep doing that. And it is a condition of arrogance to do that. Like, if you're not ready, you've got to be humble first. That's one of God's standards of love, to be humble. And then wait for God to assign you. Through the conscience, God assigns. And that's why before God's love was shared on earth, people were still assigned to be guides. And the way they were assigned is through God, via the conscience, sharing with the person, please go and look after that person for me. Yeah.
They just need to have feel about it, like they're very involved in the lives of a lot of people here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm thinking that they were doing a good thing.
Yeah. But it creates the illusion in the person on earth that they actually have a connection with God, which means they won't strive for an actual connection. Can all of you see that? If you're in the illusion of something working, are you going to then know that it isn't working? And then if you know it isn't working, at least you'll know, well, I've got to do something else, I've got to learn more, I've got to find something more out in order for something to work here. I've been assured that it will work if I'm in the right space. And remember, it's a space of sincerity that is required as a part of my space. Sincerity, passion, longing, you could say. Right? So a lot of times these people think they're longing. It's like the example given earlier, where a person thinks they're longing, but they're actually just crying because they're in a bit of a tantrum about it. They want some different result. But God does not listen to tantrums. He's like a good parent, who doesn't listen to the tantrum of their children. Right? He doesn't listen to tantrums. He doesn't respond to tantrums at all. But spirits do. Spirits who are in disharmony with God will respond to people's tantrums. They go, oh, look at the pain they're in, look at the suffering they're in. And when it's not real pain or suffering yet, it's just a tantrum to get their own way. And spirit will often step in under those circumstances. And many people who listen to divine truth are in this state where they believe they've got a connection with God, but actually don't have one at all. Not yet. Not yet. Tim, who would like to ask?
My dad's very atheist, and I've had a lot of arguments with him about it until I've stopped arguing. But I'm realising now, maybe am I basically my heart's still atheist, and I've argued with him intellectually, but really I'm not cool, okay. Sure, what I'm saying. Yeah. Maybe there's more people with the same. But
So for the recording, I said yes.
Yes. My heart still atheist.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So yeah, and this is very interesting, Tim. We see a lot of people in that place where they are in their heart still quite atheist, even though they're open to listening to divine truth. But in their heart, and they're being guided to listen, but in their heart, there's still a very strong lack of faith in God's existence, shall we say. And that is one of the first things a person needs to resolve before they can have a relationship with God, obviously. Because if in your feelings, the feeling is that God, you don't know whether God exists or not, then of course that's going to take your longings and your sincerity, isn't it, towards God? Yeah. So yes, a lot of people actually, when they say they have a longing for God, don't really have a longing for God. They have a longing for some mysterious thing that they don't yet understand or perceive to be God oftentimes. And often under those circumstances, Spirit will step in, who's not in a good condition, and share emotions with the person. And the person then believes, oh, this is God. And so then they start believing in God. And the Spirit thinks, this is good, this is good. You know, now the person's starting to believe in God, but unfortunately, God's not responding, which tells you there's something wrong with what this Spirit is doing and what this person is doing. Because God always responds to a sincere, passionate request. Always. Like, there's never a time when God does not respond. Right? If it's sincere, passionate, God will always respond. So if a spirit has to step in and respond instead of God, then it means this person is not in a state of sincere, passionate longing. And it also means this spirit is now misrepresenting God, which now will cause the person on earth to believe they've got a connection with God when they actually haven't. Right? And we see this happening all the time. Almost everyone we meet who believes they have a connection with God has this kind of a relationship with spirits. Now, there are many spirits who don't want to give it up for their own reasons. And some of their reasons are, in a real dark spirit won't give it up because he wants control. Remember last week when we talked to the group of men? You remember Errol? So those of you who haven't heard the recording yet from last week, we talked to a spirit on Sunday called Errol who was a group with a group of spirits who were connected to a lot of the young men in the audience, making them believe they had experiences with God, when actually they just had experiences with these spirits. And these spirits were in quite a dark condition and leading the people down a road of oftentimes immorality sexually and also a road of power, wanting power over others. So these spirits were leading them down that road. And we talked to the spirits as to what their motivations were. And remember, some of their motivations, we just feel sorry for the guy. We just feel like he's like us on earth. Like, it was hard on earth, Our dad didn't like us, our mum didn't like us. We didn't have much care from anybody. We want to make these guys feel like they're cared for, and they ask for God, and we, God doesn't answer. The Spirit can see God doesn't answer, because when God answers, there is actually a conduit that it gets established that a Spirit can see as a light being coming from somewhere they don't know to the person, so they can see when God is not answering, and they can see when God does answer, and the Spirit goes, well, God's not answering, and many of the spirits, of course, don't even believe in God. And they go, well, if we answer and the person goes, oh, this is lovely, this person on earth goes, oh, this is lovely, then we've got a connection with the person, which we can now utilise to influence the person in the direction we want. Remember, a lot of the young men have that. Yeah, Mikey, we were talking, where is Mikey now? Yeah, remember, Mikey, we were talking to you. And it's interesting, during the week, I think you posted a video which explains exactly what was happening. You didn't have an experience with God this week. You think you did, but you didn't. It was with your spirits. And it's exactly what we explained last week. Yeah. Happens all the time, unfortunately. And the main reason why it happens is because of the lack of sincerity, the lack of true longing in the person on earth. And this spirit just says, well, God's not answering, so I'm going to help them out. And many times they think they're doing them a favour. Remember, Errol said that we like these guys. These guys are not as bad as, I was saying most of the guys are in the hell, remember? And they were saying, no, they're not as bad as that. And but didn't you influence them to have sex with lots of partners last week and whatever? Oh yeah, but they're not as bad as that. They want to just make people on earth feel good because it makes them feel good. Also gives them some power over the person.
It's interesting though, isn't it, Tim, with your background, coming from that atheist background and having that emotionally within you, like the emotions, and then kind of getting curious about this God thing, but then also having some other addictions that cause you to want to achieve. You know, I've got to get it right and I've got to be really good at it.
Yeah.
So you can see if you don't deal with the emotions about atheism and you have that addiction, I want to get it right, then you can enter this state very easily with spirits who want to kind of intercede on God's behalf. Some of them some of them well-meaning, some of them not necessarily, but to give you sort of spirit-body experiences, I call those things. So you sort of feel like something's happening.
Mystical experiences.
Yeah. And yet, if you think about it from everything you've learned already, in your half of the soul, there's a feeling that doesn't yet believe in God, or doesn't yet have faith in
I
God.
didn't know that though. I was in my head so much thinking that I do believe in God. I do
Yes.
believe in God. And I think just getting right about being honest where I'm actually at
Yeah.
will be helpful.
Very important.
Yeah.
If you're honest about where you're at, you can make progress. If you're dishonest with yourself about where you're at, no progress can be made.
No, I didn't believe in God though. That's wow. Yeah.
Yes. But in a way, can you see it also gives you something to concentrate your effort on?
For sure. Yeah.
Because it goes, okay, I know I can't really have a relationship with God while I don't believe God exists. So let's focus on informing myself as to whether God exists. Now, there's a number of ways you can do that. One way, of course, is to experiment with conscience, because then you get answers and see how that goes. Another way is to experiment with receiving God's love, even. So you can ask God, if you exist, because at this stage you don't know whether God exists or not, you go, if you exist, can you maybe tell me how you feel about it?
I feel like I've done that though.
That's what I was going to say. The problem is with Tim's injuries, exactly what I was saying, because you have the addiction, that's going to, because
I want to feel
if
good
you
about myself.
that I'm getting it, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, to really sincerely engage with prayer, most of the time we have to start from a place that's got corrupt faith, that we don't feel so certain about God. We don't, and to be really sincere in that place, then you have to confront some feelings, usually of like, I'm not getting it, and gosh,
Frustration.
exactly the feelings about God that you need to go through in order for you to make that connection with God. But when we want that quick outcome, this is where things can get really confusing really quickly and muddy. And this is why humility, Jesus talks about humility so much, because to be really humble to your feelings and engage in a process sincerely will mean that all of this other interference, if you like, it's like fuzziness on the channel between you and God, isn't it? Messing up the connection won't happen.
Yeah, most people think they want truth, but they don't want truth. Most people think they want love, but they don't want love. Because if you think about this state on earth that we drew here on the board, remember, with the hells, in that place, you think you want love, but it's your version of love you want. And you think you want truth, but it's your version of truth you want, not God's. And it's your version of love you want, but it's not God's. And so, unfortunately, in that state, if you convince yourself, or the Spirit convinces you that you're receiving something, you're going to go, well, I don't have to try for anything higher, of higher ideal, higher principles.
Oh, I was right. My definition of love is right.
My definition of love is right, so I don't have to go for anything higher principally. You know what the higher principle is. So the problem, of course, is that you end up in this sort of illusion that is generating more and more bond between you and the spirits who are helping you. And unfortunately, because of the degradation of this occurring to the soul, you're becoming less and less connected to God in the process.
Like you're saying, you're actually building up a faulty connection, if you like, which weakens this other connection.
Which is the point
potential of that connection.
It's just barriers.
Because you think that's God, literally.
Yeah, because you think what feelings you're getting from that spirit is God. Yeah. And it's very dangerous to your spiritual progression, obviously, because it affects you until you pass. So if that doesn't change, you will stay in this illusion until you pass. And then as soon as you pass, for the most part, that bond is broken. And oftentimes you'll end up with those spirits in the spirit world. And they'll say, mate, that was us. That was us. We were going out. You know, and you go, what? You know, like, you know, And you get very confused. A lot of spirits get very confused after they pass, thinking they had a relationship they didn't actually have. Yeah. You see it also with people imitating family members as well on earth. So in other words, a spirit comes to you, claims he's your dead lost son or something. The average person on earth will be very open to accepting that and then entering a bond with the person, even though they don't validate the information. And then, of course, when they pass, they meet the person, they go, "You're not my son. What's going on?" And then you've lived in this illusion for 50 years, 60 years. Imagine. It's very, very confronting to find out the truth after 50 or 60 years. Another area that's really confronting to find out is somebody on earth claims they love you and do certain things, but all of their actions towards you and all of their history towards you is known to you after you pass. And so you find that every time they cheated on you, every time very confronting. These things are very confronting. They're all truths that could have been shared with you through conscience, could have been shared with you, but you just didn't want to know on earth. Yeah.
Tim, when you make a connection with God, it'll be really, it'll be pretty mind-blowing in a way, because you'll realise, wow, these other guys who are in this sort of illusion with me, you'll feel such a difference,
And probably it's not going to feel good.
Yeah, okay.
Because once you make the connection, you start seeing God's measure of love and you're seeing where you are in comparison to it, and it doesn't feel good. It usually feels quite bad. Because you feel the love coming from God, which feels good, and then all of a sudden you're conscious of all the bad things you've done, which feels very bad. Does that make sense? Yeah. So most people
look forward to / not look forward to.
Yeah, that's right. Most people are a bit frightened of the experience, and in fact most people try to shut it down before they can feel anything in contrast to their current condition. So they feel a little bit of love though, and then as soon as they start having an awareness emotionally that their love is completely out of harmony with it, bang, they shut it down. Like emotionally, I don't want to feel any more of that. That feels too painful. No. With God's love comes a lot of truth.
Which is good.
Which is good.
Yeah. Someday.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, so for most of the young men in the audience last week, this is what was happening. Yeah? Most of them. Not just the young men either.
But your guide here today is just helping you with that dynamic. Hey,
Understand
Tim,
it.
you're also an atheist.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Deal with that.
So there's little suggested gigs. But Tim, your dad's an atheist, you're an atheist, you say something about that, just so you become aware, you see, of what's going on. This is where you guys are helpful, they go, look what's happening here. Because your guardian in particular does not want you to have this bond with spirits. Because your guardian's not just looking after your life on earth, but he's also he's trying to look after the spiritual bonds you form. So the bonds you form with spirits. He's also trying to look after that. So your guardian's trying to go, we need to protect him. I can see some dark influences around him. There's these spirits trying to attach to him, using God as the sort of excuse, if you like, to attach. And so these spirits, your guardian is trying to protect you from that. Yeah? And you'll be going, so he's going to drop thoughts in your mind about, talk about this, or say this, or say that. He's trying to make you aware, right? Because he knows you're not aware, so he's trying to make you aware. And in the process, ask the question, you become aware, you go, oh, that's what's happening. Yes, and I do feel. And in that process, the guardian has actually helped you see that actually you don't feel God exists. And that can help you, because you can see that if I don't feel God exists, then how can I long to God and then get something from God? Obviously, it's not sincere. So where is the thing I'm getting coming from? It helps you become aware of that as well.
And it's helping you work on the facade. A lot of us want to come to God in facade, and then we're like, oh, my prayers don't get answered, or I have these confusing experiences, and who's it with? And our guides are trying to help us to break down our facade and see where we're really at. Because, I mean, I feel excited because you now know what you need to deal with emotionally to sort out that connection, don't you? But oftentimes we don't want to know what the thing is because we're like, oh, I prefer to think of myself as someone who really has faith in God. Or it could be any other thing. Pretty much wherever we are in facade, we don't want to face what's really there.
Not only that, a lot of us, particularly when you're in competition with your father, like you are, and that's why you've had a lot of arguments with your dad, right?
Because they probably wouldn't argue if they actually believed in God, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
You would not. But also, oftentimes we don't like seeing ourselves in our fathers when we're in a competition with them.
Yep. Seeing our fathers in ourselves.
Yeah. Either one.
Yeah.
And so in the competition, we're going, I'm going to be better than my dad. I'm going to be different to my dad.
I'm not like him.
And we imbibe a lot of beliefs that actually we don't necessarily agree with, but we just like them because they're different to our dads or different to our mums. Yeah. And so, you know, for many of the young men in the audience last week, they're in a deep competition with men, and you can see it. You can even see it in the sport things you've chosen, and can't you? Like, yeah. And you've introduced a lot of young men to divine truth, haven't you? But if you look at their character at the moment, a lot of them are in deep competition about it. Yeah.
Progress.
Yeah, they all reckon they're progressing and all reckon they've worked things out. You know, I'm better than you because I've worked this out.
I cried for this long.
I cried for this long. It's amazing, and everything's and all of it's fake. All of it's just not true. It's all competition engaged with other men to prove themselves. But it has no bearing on the reality of their relationship with God, because that's based on sincerity, passion, and longing, and nothing else. It's not based on a competition or the motivation being competitive. So with a lot of the men you know that you've attracted to divine truth, they're very similar to yourself. They sort of look up to competing with their dad, and they look up to, you know, making progress better than their fathers did, you know, in life and so forth. And yet these spirits are often having the same influence over them as well. You can also see a commonality between all of the men and these influences. There's very little regard for women. And a person who's received some of God's love has equal regard for men and women. Right? And so what we notice is many men who believe themselves to be following God's principles and receiving God's love don't have a proper regard of women.
And can I just clarify that point? If they don't yet have a proper regard of the opposite gender or one of the genders, it bothers them deeply. And the young...
I mean, if they were sensitive with God.
Yeah, sorry, if they've received God's love,
it would bother you like full on that you don't have a proper regard.
It would bug you that you don't have a good sort of regard for women.
But most of the young girls who are listening to divine truth and say they've got a connection with God still have the same attitude to women that we saw they had when we first met them.
And unbothered by that.
And not bothered by it either. And in fact, they feel quite justified that their beliefs and that their actions towards women are actually valid. They believe they love women. They believe they care for women, and often completely do not. Very, very selfish in regards to their actions towards women. Yeah. So.
Thanks.
Oh, thanks God.
That's
good. Yeah, that's right.
I'll be the first.
Yeah, that's right. That's good.
Yeah. I'll get it before my mates.
Yeah, so, you know, anybody who's competitive about receiving love hasn't received love. You know, you don't feel competitive with other people's love. You just don't. It's anybody who says, you know, they're better than you because they know better than you do, in the sense that they've received more love, so they know better than you, and they're putting you down as a result, not just telling you the facts. Then, you know, and it's for the purpose of undermining you. Obviously, they haven't received love either. Yeah. Because if they had, they wouldn't be able to do those things. Yeah. Yep. Even they might have received love, mind you, but they might not be acting in harmony with it, of course. But either way, it's not good. Yeah. Now we were coming over here. Can we go to man?
Just watch the camera.
So my question is from earlier, you talked about in the hells and on earth, we have a hellish concept of God.
Yeah.
And what about people like myself who didn't grow up with any concept of God?
Yep.
How is your
You probably have the
concept of
least
God
hellish concept of God.
Okay, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you're gonna put on God your relationship with your parents.
That's the trouble. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So the trouble is that when we start talking about God with people who do not have a concept of God, they basically start seeing the concept of God. Everyone's okay with this. I've got most of this off. I want to keep those there. Anyone who doesn't have a concept of God basically views God as an authority. So we start looking at God being the authority. Now, historically, who was the authority in your life?
Parents.
Well, there's usually one parent over the other parent.
Dad.
So dad number one, and then
Mom.
mum, as long as it didn't disagree with dad.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then
I don't know, like teachers and stuff?
teachers, yeah. So school,
Yeah.
obviously, authority.
And other family members.
But can you see in between here, probably some other family members might be applicable as well, like sometimes grandparents or uncles and aunts. It depends how close you were to them, doesn't it? And it could even be an older sister or brother, couldn't they? If they're like 10 years difference in age, you could view them as the authority. So there's quite a lot of, let's instead of teachers, the next one is really family, or you could call them close family, couldn't you? And then there's family. And then there's teachers. Who else? Eventually you become a teenager. Who starts to influence you a lot then?
Partners.
Peers. Peers first, usually. Right, people who are you consider to be your friends. And then as you get, oops, I can't count either. So then you get to next one, and after peers you start having relationships, and then they start to bring to bear generally some influence. And it depends on the power dynamics of your relationship with your dad or your mum as to what you're going to accept from your partner, isn't it? So if your dad has taught you that men's opinions are more important than women's, and you're aligned to your dad, in other words, you have more affection for your dad than your mum, then you're going to believe men's opinions are more important than women's. And so when you have a partner, and if that partner is a man and that's your sexual orientation, you're going to think his opinion is more important than yours.
And then there could be rebellion about that. And kind
Of course, pain occurs and then there's rebellion. So you could have all of that in harmony, or you could have the opposite of that, couldn't you? Where you're in rebellion. So let's call it rebellion.
And yeah, but also sometimes if dad has been a really big authority in your life, your partner really doesn't get a look in it because dad still is.
Yeah.
Even you can get married and have kids, but a lot of people, dad still is.
Yeah.
And
you
that's
might
why
pass and you still will be.
that's why you don't listen to your husband, because you're still listening to dad.
Yeah. So if partner and dad disagree, who's important? The authority from childhood is dad. That's the one you're probably going to listen to the most, unless you're in rebellion. And then whatever dad says, you'll try to do the opposite. Which means he's still really got control over you.
Still the authority.
Still the authority.
Yeah, I wonder how much he actually does have authority over me, because he wasn't very present. So
Correct.
he was just when he was present, it was just very, very negative and intense. And
Okay, so heavy projections. Usually the parent who is the most competitive with you, the most argumentative with you, the most unpleasant with you, is the parent you try to please more. Unfortunately, So, yeah.
So then when you're thinking about God, obviously all of that stuff gets imposed on God.
Yeah.
You do, yeah,
In a way, most parents set themselves up as God to you in your childhood. They basically act like they are the ruler of your life. Right? In fact, most parents will even say that. I'm your parent, you need to listen to me. I'm your parent, I should be able to define, I'm your parent, you should listen to me about your relationships. I'm your parent, you should listen to me about the job you want to do. I'm your parent, you should, go off and do that sport because that's the one I prefer you to do. I'm your parent, why aren't you listening to me? And this is actually a part of a parent's desire to set up themselves as God in your life.
I think my mom did that more.
Yeah. Yep. But what's your mum's opinion of Dad?
She was outwardly quiet with him, but she was very angry with him.
Correct, but
And he was very outwardly angry.
Yeah, but if you think about it, she still did what he wanted, whenever he wanted it.
Yeah.
So she also taught you to do what.
And I rebelled against that.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is when we start thinking of God, we start going, what's God like? I think God's going to be like a mixture of all of these authority influences in my life. Sometimes nice, sometimes kind, sometimes not, sometimes loving, sometimes not, sometimes punishing, sometimes confusing. Because a lot of times these people were confusing. Like one time they say one thing is good and the next time they say something different is good, And so they're often confusing.
Does it automatically get involved in God? Like, I don't feel like I think of God that way. It's a mixture of those. But is it just kind of automatic when you don't?
Well, these are the emotions you have towards authority. And naturally, the emotions you have towards authority, you're going to start imposing towards God. And they will need to be addressed, these emotions towards authority. Yeah. Because God's authority is completely different, isn't it? It's a loving authority. Yeah. And to know what that means, we have to have God's definition of love to understand what that means. These people had a definition of love that differed, right? Your dad had a definition of love, you do what I want. Right? Or mum should do what I want and you should do what I want. Yeah. Close family might have, dad's not a bit of a terrible man, so don't listen to him too much. So sometimes you feel dad's overbearing and sometimes you feel you should listen to him and other times you feel when dad gets too overbearing you should not listen to him and then that gets imposed upon God. So sometimes you listen to God when it's in your favour and other times you don't listen to God because it didn't feel to be in your favour. You believe about God as the authority the same things you believe about what you're being brought up to believe as your authority. Yeah. So then you start you're doing things like going, sometimes it's good following God's ideas, and other times it's not so good, not in my interest. Right? And so that, most people want to have some level of rebellion against authority as well. Yeah. So when God says this is the law and there's no line to be crossed, you're going, of course there's a line to be crossed. There always is. You can negotiate a bit, you can manoeuvre around a bit, it's going to be fine. God will forgive you anyway. Doesn't everybody say God forgives? Of course God forgives and God's going to forgive you. Not understanding that the penalties on your soul are going to bring you to a place because of the law. God forgives you for everything you do, but the law is still going to demand its result.
Yeah, so then you have these consequences, and that's something that I grew up not believing I could get away from.
Correct.
Consequences.
Yeah, so a lot of people with the attitude towards authorities, I can get away with things. I can negotiate my way out of things.
This isn't going to affect me negatively if I do this wrong thing.
That's right.
Yeah, a lot of people don't see God as an authority. They're like, I love God. No, God's great. Great. Yeah, God and I get along good. But it's because they don't recognise God's authority in their life. So they don't actually yet have a relationship with God. Because when you do, you recognise, I don't get to say what's good.
Yes.
Yeah.
God does.
God does. I don't get to say what's right and wrong. God does. And there's consequences when I do something wrong.
Imposed by the law that God established.
Yeah.
And are immovable. Like the consequence, you can't manoeuvre yourself out, you can't negotiate. All the things that many people could do in their childhood, but you can't stay silent either. That's not an option either. So a lot of people learn in their childhood life, you're just quiet. You sort of slip under the radar. Not God's radar. God's radar is like, no, you're sinning, this is the result.
It's one of those deep sea sonar
Yeah.
things.
Some of you learned in your childhood, you can argue, and if you argue strong enough, the parent gives up after a while. You know, they just throw up their hands in the air and go, do what you want. You know, so some of you learned that. So that's what you do now. Every one of God's rules, you argue with. Yeah, that kind of thing.
Can I ask one more thing on that? Staying silent. So I wasn't allowed to argue. I wasn't allowed to say anything that I felt that was in disagreement.
But you still did what you wanted, right?
I guess so.
Yeah.
Probably.
Particularly when you became a teenager, right?
Particularly. Yeah.
Yeah. So in that place you learn. But don't argue with God. Just do what you want anyway. That kind of thing. Yeah. All of it affects your attitude towards what you believe God to be. Yeah. And most people do believe that they can, you know, if they can't argue with God, they at least believe that they can just stay silent and get under the radar at least with the law and things like that. Of course, none of that actually works with God, and that's what shocks most people when they pass. When they pass, they go, what? I didn't get away with that. What? I didn't get away. What do you mean that's a problem? That shouldn't be a problem. Like, I don't see why it should be a problem. You know, you have people, there's even spirits that come along to those people and go, the reason why where you are, look, it's a loving arrangement in the spirit world. The spirit will try to attempt to explain to you why you are where you are when you're in the house. And if you have a sincere motive to ask the question, they will explain. But a lot of them come up with a sincere motive to ask, why am I here? What's going on? Something's gone wrong. God's got it wrong for me. I did the right things. You know, there's many religious people who, of course, believe this way. God's got it wrong. And when the spirit tries to explain, the person who's already in the spirit world, usually for hundreds of years, tries to explain to the newcomer why. The person goes, I can't believe that. I can't even believe that's an issue. Like, which is the reason why they're in the state they are. Because they can't even see that it's an issue. Yeah, so it's pretty tricky. We become a rebel, don't we, against a lot of things. Yeah. So yes, your concept of God, and particularly God's authority, will be very much in alignment with what happened in your childhood with regard to people in authority. So while your concept of God may not be distorted in the sense that you believe God would be loving, your definition of what that love would do is going to be quite severely distorted. Does that make sense? And while you might believe God will be truthful, your definition of what is required with truth will be severely distorted. Because for a lot of us, we're taught, just stay silent and we're still being truthful. You know? And then when it comes to your definition of what kindness is and consideration is and empathy is and your definition of love being a sacrifice and all these kind of things, all of those definitions are going to be imposed upon what you believe God's definition of love is. So even though you might be agnostic, at the end of the day, there's still all the issues with God. Yeah. But of course, being an agnostic means that there won't, in addition, be spiritual beliefs such as, you know, Jesus' blood saves you, or you are God, or, you know, you can reincarnate, or all of these other beliefs that are all false, right? None of those beliefs will be there because you don't have a firm belief of anything when you're an agnostic. But when it comes to your emotional state and your beliefs about authority, you will have some very firm beliefs, generally. And that, of course, will affect your relationship with God. Yeah.
Thanks.
Good question. All right, let's come to Robert here first.
So, starting with the dynamic of the Spirit interfering with the relationship with God,
Yeah.
I have been waking up to this reality in my life.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah.
And it's been happening kind of like as a cycle.
Yeah.
Up, down, like.
Where you sort of recognize what's going on, you mean?
What I would say is that, like, and this is one of the core wounds I'd say that I have, or injuries, is that I have hitched a ride with a spirit multiple times in my life, and every time
With different spirits, you mean?
I don't know if they were different or
Yeah,
not, but
they are, have been different, yeah.
presumably.
Yeah.
I'm not attuned to spirits that way yet.
Yeah.
And then I get to some high point and the bottom drops, and then I crash, and nobody is there. Everybody abandons me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Including the spirit.
This,
Everything.
you mean, especially the spirits, yeah.
And I recently have been awakening to this.
Yeah.
Recognizing that basically everything that I've ever considered something I've done well in my life
Yeah.
was related to this type of relationship.
Yeah.
And it's leaving me in a state. And I've also done many, many, many unloving things
Yeah.
in an effort to avoid pain.
Yeah.
But now I feel like I'm entering a state of like complete collapse in
Yeah.
almost every way.
Yeah.
Like, because this has been happening since I was a little boy.
Yeah. How old since you could remember?
I think around 4.
Yeah.
3, 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
That's
think
fine.
there was even some distortions even earlier than that.
Yeah.
Where do I start?
Yeah, firstly, isn't it interesting how you feel now? Because you can sort of see that feeling of, oh my God, like wasted life. And you imagine what anybody who's done this their entire life on earth
Right.
feels. You know? My whole wasted life following these directions of spirits and thinking thinking it's all good. And often these spirits are influencing you to do bad things too, obviously.
Right.
And then of course you feel regret about those things as well, and then build up the pain about all those things. But you correctly identified what your problem is, though. Can you remember what you said? Just now.
I've identified a lot of problems, so.
You said your problem is with emotion. You are always trying to avoid painful emotion.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm in a state of intense physical pain.
Yeah.
And physical problems.
Yeah.
And I have been for a long time.
Yeah. So the trouble with avoiding emotion is that it attracts a lot of things. Firstly, it attracts spirits who help you avoid emotion, and then who want you to do things that they want you to do so that you can avoid emotion, because they're trying to avoid emotion too.
Yeah.
Right?
And they've been using you
They've been
throughout
using
your life.
you, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
they can feel this intense desire to avoid emotion, and
Yeah.
they're like, oh, but they can also feel that you're gonna. This is going to sound really bad, but you're kind of a good mule. Like you're going to be you're kind
Compliant.
of,
Yes.
yeah. What was that word? Donna?
Compliant.
Compliant, but also contained in a way. If like you're not prone to having a manic episode, for example, which is similar to people who
Not
have
yet, I should say.
manic episodes are in a similar dynamic with spirits, where they really want to avoid their pain, but there's almost this desire for power in them as well that just causes them to attract very, very, very dark spirits who are almost reckless. Whereas these spirits with you have been like, oh, well, I never got to do this on earth, let's go and do this thing. And some of the things are not good, but they're like, you'll do it and you'll stay sort of within the bounds of what society sort of reasonably will accept. And so we can get a lot of mileage out of this guy. And then when we're done,
Yeah, they don't want to get chucked in jail or something, because
No.
if you do, then they can do half the things they want to do, right? So
yeah.
Yeah.
And then the cycle repeats, like you said. But as Jesus said, it's all coming from this sort of burning desire, if you like, to avoid emotion, to
Now-
avoid pain.
I should point out, I just should point out that last week we talked about these matters, and so it'd be worth listening to last week's conversation, because we talked about the two motives: the motive to get pleasure at any cost, which you've really stopped doing now,
Yeah.
right?
That was never my specialty, even
No.
when I did it.
No, that's right. That's right. So you never really
Pleasure
good at
was,
that.
I wanted pleasure, but I never quite even got there.
Yeah, no worries. But the other one that's even more dangerous is the desire to avoid pain at all costs. And that is the biggest motivator.
So you really know how to solve the problem, but even in the way you described it, you can feel fear of resolving it in a humble way. Because you say, I'm in intense pain, my life feels very painful now,
Yeah.
but you don't yet want to just feel that pain.
Well, I feel it, but it's like I hold it.
You're
You're
controlling
living in it.
Yeah.
You're controlling
Yeah,
it.
living in it.
You're not experiencing the emotional pain.
Right.
And this is why, and also you don't even want to experience the physical pain either, really.
Well, I guess.
You haven't-
I don't want to, but
you
I
don't
feel
want
like
to.
it's
You
always
don't-
there.
Yeah, you don't surrender to it.
How would I do that?
Yeah, so firstly, surrendering to physical pain is just letting yourself go into a humble state and just having a good cry about all the pain you're in.
I mean, I tantrum,
Yeah,
and I do shed tears, but I don't like
sob.
sob,
Yeah, that's right. So you can be humble. So the problem is developing humility. But let's look at the problem and then its solution. Right? So the problem is avoiding pain. That's the problem. The problem is you want to.
I want to.
You want to. And you're almost going to yourself at this stage, I want to avoid pain. I don't care what it costs me. And in particular, you want to avoid emotional pain. But the physical pain is a result of the avoidance of the emotional pain. So you firstly need to also see the relationship between your physical pain and the denial of the emotional pain. See, at the moment, it's sort of like, I'm in so much physical pain now. What do I do? Can you see? You didn't feel you were in so much emotional pain now. What do you do? Because at that stage, your idea was to avoid it, right? But now you're in the physical pain. Now you want to do something. But what do you want to do? So let's be honest about what you want to do.
I want to get out of it.
How? How do you want to get out of it? How would you like to get out of it?
Oh, many ways.
Yeah, far away.
Probably. I mean, no, that's not entirely true. I'm kind of like that. You know, I've learned this expression from an addict, like a drug addict or alcoholic, a dry drunk.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean by
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
I feel like I've entered that.
Yeah.
Except it's not just alcohol. I used to drink a lot.
So what are you doing there?
I'm like depriving myself of everything.
Yeah.
That's like the only way I've been able, and even as I re-enter, like relating with people again, attempting to be more humble to those relationships, then I just feel like I'm lying all the time. Like
Yeah.
I'm just, because all I want to say to everybody is, I'm in pain, I'm in pain, I'm in pain.
Yeah. Okay. So deprivation is a form of denial, isn't it? Denying yourself what you really want to do, but you're denying yourself from doing it. You try to stop yourself. And it requires a lot of intellectual effort, doesn't it? Yeah,
That's my one specialty.
that's right. Yeah,
And even that now is getting dulled.
yeah, that's right. Your capacity to think as your pain increases, your capacity to think decreases.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens to every person who becomes intellectually dominant is as the pain increases, they become less and less intellectually dominant. And you can see why God's designed under the penalties that way. Because eventually your intellectual dominance will disappear and you'll feel something.
It's happening.
Yeah. So this is
It's
good.
definitely happening.
Yeah. But what other methods do you use
Um,
to get out of this emotional pain?
like insincere prayer.
Okay, so what do you mean by
Like
that?
the negotiating, the begging for a solution.
Yeah. And beg.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most people will connect with that. I mean, most people go to God firstly begging.
Yes. You do it well.
Yeah, that's right. And does it work?
No.
No, because God doesn't respond to it, but we think God will, right? Yeah. Okay, what else?
Well, things seem to happen though,
Of course.
but they're just not what I'm like.
Well, they're going to be spirit things.
The spirit things, but then there are things that also are leading me here, and I
Oh,
can
of
sense those things too.
Yeah, so there's some sincere things about, I want to find the truth.
Yeah.
I want to find out the truth about what's going on. When you get to the state where you're really distressed, generally you start going, I need to solve this problem.
Right.
Yeah, so that's a more sincere state,
That's where I'm getting.
but it's a very selfish one.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Also, you're getting more and more honest with yourself about the situation, aren't you?
Yeah.
Like,
So there is an improvement in honesty. So these are the negative things you do, but there's your honesty is improving, honesty with yourself. Your arrogance is
Decreasing.
decreasing because of the pain, right?
Because I just have something to show for myself anyway.
Yeah, okay. So your arrogance
Everything's just drying up.
is going down. That's improving. So these are good things. Yeah. What else is happening? One thing you think is bad is your pain is increasing.
But I'm relating with it differently. Not always better, but sometimes better.
Yeah.
Like insofar as surrendering to, I think sometimes I'm surrendering to it more.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Not fully.
Yeah, at least to the physical pain.
Yeah.
The emotional pain's still pretty shut down towards right.
It's hard to even get there at all.
Yeah.
I try things, but like I try, trying to release my rage.
Yep. Anything else improving, do you think?
Improving? There is desire growing, I think.
Yeah, caused by the pain probably, right? Yeah. Yeah, desire to know facts, understand what's going on.
I mean, I'd say humility is increasing too, little by little.
Yep, well,
In the sense that I know that I can't do it.
Yes, so that's an improvement in humility.
Yeah.
Understanding that you need help.
Yeah, and that no one other than God really, other than being here.
Yeah, that's an improvement in humility, isn't it?
Yeah.
So there are some good things happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just not enough yet to break through into this.
There have been cracks.
Yeah, and obviously the more you pursue truth, the cracks will widen. Isn't that true? That's what happens. The more you produce, the more truth you accept emotionally, the less fear you have about going somewhere. At the moment, you could say you've got a high level of fear about emotion, about feeling painful emotions. Yeah. Relating, obviously, when you said this began, when you were...
I think it started like
4?
3,
4, yeah.
Like 5 at the latest.
So obviously it's all related to that time of your life, isn't it? That's where it began. So it's emotion associated with your childhood that you're unwilling to go through and experience. Yeah. So the question then becomes, well, how do this fear, this terror I've got of this, because it's really a terror, isn't it? How do you go through the experience of it? How do you be humble enough to go through the experience of terror is really the question.
Man, I've heard you refer at times to like fake emotion, fake facade emotions.
Yep.
I feel like I'm experiencing those
A lot.
a lot, and I'm wondering, is that actually, if I at least surrendered to that, is that going to eventually take me
No.
to something real? No, so that I had to avoid doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. Because it's new, because it's still new feelings. Like,
Yes, I understand.
Recently, the facade emotions have changed, and there's a lot of new feelings there.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if that was something that was worth at least like finishing.
You're asking if something fake, it can lead you to something real.
If you kind of like go through it.
If you go through it enough.
Sure. I know that sounds stupid.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. And one thing that going through something fake can do is you end up realising it's all fake.
Sounds like how I feel about my life.
Does that make sense? So going through some fake emotions, which I've experienced myself, I understand the feeling. Going through fake emotions is sometimes good for you in the sense that you come out, you might do it for months on end and then come out of it going, nothing's really changed. So what's the point?
I thought it was partly giving me a sense, I could be totally warped on this.
Yep.
It was giving me a little bit of a sense of faith though, because even though they were fake, I wasn't dying. Like it was sort of this weird sense that like, oh, I can experience.
And you're only not dying because they're not real.
Oh, okay.
So that's a delusion.
Okay.
That belief. You know, when you go through these, you will feel like you're dying.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that's what you're scared of, right?
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the trouble with fake emotion is you can stay in the cycle of them for years and years and years.
But I did feel like I was dying sometimes. You're saying that still wasn't true?
Well, a lot of what you're experiencing so far is just feeling like I'm gonna die, not that I am dying, which is a different feeling. It's more like I'm gonna die and I'm gonna try and prevent it. That's what the tantrum's all about.
Interesting.
Right? And then you got to get to a stage where You feel what you actually feel. And by the way, you're not going to die, and you've been told that, but you don't believe that. Not yet, because as a child, you did feel you were going to die, feeling emotion, right? The circumstances surrounding your childhood were quite severe at times, right? Think about dad relationship, mum relationship.
Just like manipulation everywhere.
Yeah. And also, what kind of feelings were coming from dad and mum? If you let yourself feel the feelings coming from them, what were they? Are they happy you were in their life?
Not as me.
Yeah. What did they want?
They wanted
Someone else other than you, right?
They wanted some, an image.
Yes, of themselves, really. Yeah. And what did that mean for your emotions and your soul, really? It's basically you're not allowed to be you anymore.
Yeah, murder, basically.
That's right. It's the same feeling. A child going through that feels like they're going to be killed at any moment, right? Even though that's not what's coming at them. They feel that because their entire personality and nature is denied, and they're not allowed to be their entire personality and nature. So a child in that state feels like they're on death's door, and are very frightened all the way through as a result, right? It's like, I am not accepted as I am. What's going to happen to me if I'm not? Like, it can be very scary, right, for a child. Because remember, you got adults, big people compared to the child. There's all this really tough, strong emotion coming from them that as a child you're very sensitive to, and very much want to shut down almost. And you don't want to have your own emotional experience from it, because you know if you do, you'll be punished for it. So it's very tough on the child. Right? These are the things you're going to have to let yourself realise. But in amongst all that, there's a lot of emotion. And this emotion you've been taught to be terrified of through that experience. You follow? Mm-hmm. So what you're going to have to do is deconstruct the attitudes of your parents in particular towards yourself. Mm-hmm. Right? And you're going to have to be honest about them, honest to yourself about not what they outwardly did, but what their inner feelings were towards you. And primarily, what their inner feelings are towards you. You're going to have to be honest about them and feel them. What's happening at the moment is you're locking up all those feelings. You were quite a sensitive child, as most children are, but for many children, they're desensitized by the age of 2 or 3. You weren't. You were more, you stayed sensitive for longer, right? So you were more conscious of the problem than the average child would be. And so as a result, you've got all this terror of emotion, like terror of what's going to happen when you are you, fundamentally. What's going to happen if you are you? And it feels like, from a child's perspective, that you're going to die if you're you. That's the strength of the fear you're in. You're going to die if you feel you, right? And this is what's blocking you from feeling your emotion. That you're going to die if you are you. Like, I don't mean die body, I mean die soul. Like, die. Be non-existent. Annihilation. Die. You understand the difference?
Yes.
Yeah. And that emotion is what's preventing you from going through your feelings. Now, that it's a belief that it's a false one, but it's a belief that's there, and this is what you need to pray about, the belief. Yeah. Yeah, it's a spiritual belief. I'll die if I feel my hard emotions. It's a spiritual belief. So a spiritual belief, remember, is based on principles. So it's a principle that you've got going on inside of your soul, inside of your feelings. Principled feelings are always related to spiritual beliefs, right? Right? The principle is, if I feel emotion, so this is a spiritual principle that you have. It's false, but you have it. If I feel my emotion, I will be obliterated. Not just die, but your physical body will die, but also your soul, everything gets obliterated. That's what you feel, right? And that spiritual principle is telling you, don't feel your emotion. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Do something else, do something else. And this is why you've been in the cycle, this spirit cycle that we described earlier, That's why you've been in the cycle, this cycle that I had here, or was it on the other page, where you have a spirit feeding you things for a period of time, right? Feeding Robert things. And then eventually the energy to do so stops for whatever reason. That spirit leaves, another spirit comes along, feeds Robert some things. Yeah. And that process is happening because Robert is desperate, right? Desperate to the point of I'll be annihilated if I feel emotion. What you need to attain is God's truth. How you obtain God's truth is through the conscience and through receiving some of God's love. So if you can do those things, if you can focus on asking God, what is God's truth about emotion? What does God feel about it? Sitting down with yourself and working through what you feel about it compared to what God feels about it. You feel it's annihilation, God feels you'll be fine. Right? And working out the difference to the point where your faith in dealing with emotion is greater than your desire to avoid it. Now, remember, for other people, you might have seen some things I've drawn before where progress for many people is dependent on sort of two fundamental things. One is, this one's starting to run out, I'll have to move on those. So red used to mean bad, but it doesn't mean bad anymore. So on one hand, you've got, let's call it your pain, which is in a scale. Right? And then you've got, on the other side, you've got your desire, let's call it your faith, because the faith is desire, right? And that's a scale. Right? So you can also call that desire. Faith. Faith in a future thing happening. At the moment, your faith in feeling emotion is like there, 0. Right? Just off of 0. You've had a few breakthroughs, but it's just off of that, right? Your pain is getting up here, right?
It's been up there, but it's been intense for a long time, but the frequency is now constant.
So now not only is it intense, it's not just intense for short bursts now, it's intense all the time.
Yeah, and I'll get like a few days off and it comes back, and it used to be that I could get months off.
So let's call it an 8 or something, right? Now, what's going to have to happen? This pain is based on the emotion, remember, it's emotional pain causing all your physical pain. What's going to have to happen in order for you to deal with this? This is going to have to be greater than that. So your faith in dealing with emotion is going to have to be greater than your fear of dealing with the emotion. Right? In order to feel the pain. So this is, I shouldn't put pain there, so just call it fear, terror. Right? Your faith is going to have to be, your desire, your faith is going to have to be greater than your fear. How do you reduce fear? How do you get fear down? What gets fear down? No? Not just that. Truth number 1 is how you get fear down. Then you act upon the truth. That gets fear down. Right? What builds faith? Prayer. Well, that's true, prayer does, but it has to be sincere. At the moment, your prayer is don't.
No, it comes out of the pain.
That's right. Your prayer is really going, I don't want to go that far. I don't want to, I don't want to feel that. But, so let's say prayer is not available to you. What else builds faith?
I don't know. Well,
Desire. What builds desire? That's another way you could say it.
I don't know.
Let's say you're in a relationship. What builds your desire for the other person?
Love.
Right? It does, yeah. So you've got to come to
Curiosity,
So you're going to have to come to love your emotion. At the moment, you sort of have a hate relationship with your emotion, don't you?
Yeah, it's like not now. It's always a not now.
Keep it away from me. Don't let me have it. Stay away. So love is going to build your desire. In a relationship, what else builds the desire? It's not just love, is it? Like, how do I fall in love with Mary?
Attraction.
Well, no. How do I... Attraction is usually just a function of addiction. So How do I fall in love with Mary?
Ask. I don't know.
Well, what do? I get to
No.
know her. Yeah,
Okay,
get to know her,
so-
right? So knowledge,
Knowledge.
right? Knowledge of what in this case?
God?
Well, there's a few things you'd get to know. So we want truth about is knowledge, right? You want to get to know how the soul works.
Okay.
You want to get to know what God feels about your emotion. There's things you want, what God feels, and what God feels about emotion. You want to get to know what's good for you. What does God feel is good for you? Yeah? And is it good for you?
Yeah, that's where I feel paralyzed, is I don't know what's good for me anymore.
That's right, which is good, because before you did think what was good for you.
Yeah.
You thought you knew.
I thought I knew.
Yeah, now you don't, which is good. That's more humble, right?
Yeah.
Before you was in a state of arrogance where you go, I know what's good for me, get another addiction med, right?
And even though they were healthy things.
Yeah, avoid pain as much as I can. I know that's good for me. This is what you felt before. Now you know it's not working. It's just causing more pain, so it's not working. So we want to seek knowledge on how the soul runs, how it works, how God feels about you feeling your emotion, right? How God created, and whether emotions are good or not. So are emotions good? I need to experiment whether they're good or not. Right? How do I do that? I let myself have an emotion, and then I go, well, was that good or not?
That's simple.
Right? Isn't that how, like, if I'm getting to know Mary and I want to feel her feelings as well, I want to get to know Mary as a person, as an individual, right? As a person. So if I want to get to know my emotion, I really have to do the same as how getting to know Mary. I'm asking Mary questions about her life and her history and her experiences and how she felt about those experiences, and I get to know her character, which is she thinks she can develop. But also, in doing that, I get to know her personality as well. Now, in here, if I'm looking at getting to know my emotion, what do? I need to ask myself questions about emotion. How does this emotion feel? What I did, I didn't know anything about emotion when I was 30, really. I was pretty clueless about emotion. For the most part, I was shut down. I didn't understand much about it. When I was in my early, mid-30s, I started to want to get to know emotions. So what I did was I found some some websites, actually. We talked about it a few weeks ago, I think in the first written talk, how I went and found a site that describes words for emotions, all the different types of emotions, positive emotions and negative ones. And there was like, I forget what the site was called. I think it was something like non-violent communication, that site. And in that site it had a list of emotions, like negative emotions and positive emotions. And what I did was I sat down with it and I asked myself, that word there that they have called condescension, what does that feel like? Well, that word over there that they have called desire or happiness or joy, what does that feel like? Now, some of them I didn't know at all what they felt. Most of them I didn't know what they felt like. But I decided I had to try to feel and ask God to help me feel the feeling of what that felt like. What does despair feel like? What does like rage feel like? What does arrogance feel like? Because I didn't really have much clue, to be honest. So I got this list and I started going through all of these feelings, and it took me months, right, to ask myself, what did it feel like? And could I feel the feeling that it felt like? Or was it all just a bunch of words to me and I couldn't feel it at all? So I had to be honest with myself. That one, despair, I don't know what that is. Now, since then, I've come to know what despair is.
I think I have the sense of it myself.
But when I began, I had no idea at all what it was, right? None at all. But after I started having some memories of my own and everything, I've come to know what that feeling is a lot, right? But I didn't know. And I had to educate myself. Remember, knowledge, education. I had to educate myself about what these feelings felt like. Makes sense to you?
Positive ones as well.
Positive ones as well as negative ones, yes.
I need that.
Yeah, because I had no clue. Mostly, I had more clue about the negative ones than the positive ones, to be honest. Yeah, but I had very little clue even about the negative ones, what they actually felt like. I was quite shut down. And what I had to do is educate myself about what these feelings felt like inside me. You know, what I hadn't experienced anger until just moments in my life, maybe 4 times anger. That's all I ever experienced anger up until then. One time I slammed the door of a car and it shattered. It was my own car, so I had to fix it. That's one I remember. Most of the time it was to do with my car.
Or a computer.
Or a computer. One time I remember grabbing the computer and just threw it on the ground. Of course I had to fix that. One of those computers. I had to buy a new one. So you know, there's only a few times when I experienced sort of that level of anger, you know. And I didn't really know what it felt like to be in that state a lot, you know, or anything. Now I do. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I had to educate myself. It had to be a positive action I took. Now you imagine if you educate yourself about what emotions feel like, can you see your sincerity is growing, isn't it? Because now you want to know what they feel like. You want to know how you experience them. You want to know what kind of feelings they have associated with them. You want to know, like, whether you compare them or not, even, right? So in educating yourself, you're really educating yourself about how your soul works. Your soul works. You're educating also yourself about recognizing the feelings within you that you can now choose to feel if you chose to or not, right? You can recognize which feelings in particular you connect with. But when I say despair, you know, you got a lot of that, right? Yeah, you know that. And it's interesting for me when I saw the different words, and I had to look up the meaning of some of them, by the way, like in terms of what it meant, really. Once I started connecting to them, I go, whoa, there's a lot of that there, like that I wasn't aware of before because I hadn't even thought of it. I hadn't even thought of studying emotion as a solution, but obviously I had some spirits helping me to help me with this, right? So part of it is gaining more truth about your soul, how it works, what's inside of you, and that is about educating you about the emotion itself, right? And the beauty of doing that is it starts making you more sensitive to what's there, and also more willing to experience it. Yeah. Because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to increase your faith about having emotion, while at the same time reducing your fear about having it. And once the faith is above your fear, you'll start having it. That makes sense, right? Yeah. At the moment, your fear is quite high, and you're sort of treating your emotion like you can't find out about it, you can't know, you can't understand it, you're treating it like that, right? It's like it's sort of mum's a mysterious thing that you really don't know a lot about at this stage.
And it seems like it would take me forever to do. Like I can't find the time to give it what it needs.
Yeah, that's a false belief. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not true, because it's important for you. It's going to solve a lot of your physical problems.
Right. Which is what I'm realizing. I've spent so much time trying to take care of myself physically, and it's totally not working anymore.
That's right. Yeah, every person does that. Because they're terrified in their emotion. They go, I can fix my body. Let's focus on that. Mm-hmm. You know, I'll be eating more healthy. I'll be going for a walk every day or running or weights or whatever is going to keep me. Like, let's work on my body, but while the emotion is there, your body's going to keep degrading, and the pain's going to keep increasing. Yeah? So after a while, you learn that, so that you know that doesn't work. So that's good, because a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think that's the solution. So at least you know you've already learnt a lot of things, right? The key is now to educate yourself about your feelings, about what these feelings feel like.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
I like learning when I know what to learn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and this is what I came to see myself in this process, was that I was so desensitized to emotion. I had no clue what anything really felt like, right? Really, like, no, a few things I could feel, but not a lot. You know, somebody once asked me, a psychologist actually once asked me, well, how I would feel if a person came in and shot my two sons dead. How I'd feel, and I couldn't tell him. Yeah, because I didn't know. And so you know, I had to sensitise myself to all of these things. And in the process, I was educating myself about my feelings. Makes sense? Every single person on earth is responsible for educating themselves about their feelings. So it's a very good thing to try, do yourself, is to educate yourself about your feelings. You educate yourself about your feelings, your fear of your feelings will go down. That's good. You educate yourself about your feelings, your desire to feel your feelings will go up. Eventually, your desire to feel your feelings will overcome your fear of feeling them, and you'll start feeling them. And that's how it works. Yeah.
Thank you.
And what most people don't realise is this something you're going to have to do for yourself. And the reason why is because your feelings are yours. God can't help you with them unless you ask God to help you with them. And if you can't ask God to help you with them and you don't know what they are.
And this is a conversation to have with God, like, help me feel this feeling.
Yes.
What does
it feel like? What does this feeling feel like? Can I have a spirit come along and project at me that feeling so I know what it feels like? You know, even if you can't feel it within yourself, you know, you can ask God to help you with things, and every time God will want, if your prayer is sincere, God will help you, and He'll help you feel it. But you're going to have to be sincere, because it all boils down to being sincere. Every response, right?
How could I not, like, I just want to know, like, I mean,
yeah, that's
is that
sincere.
enough?
Yeah, that's sincere, isn't it?
Okay.
You want to know, and if you're prepared to work your way through educating yourself about emotion, can you see that's an expression of your sincerity? Mm-hmm. See, if all you're going to do is sit down and go, and this is what we see a lot of people do, I've got all these emotions, I don't really know what most of them are. Can you help me with them? Now, that's not very sincere. Because, like, what work am I doing? Like, if I'm going, can you help me with them? What work am I doing to help myself with them? That's sincere, isn't it? So that's the difference between, let's say a person has been asked to give up smoking, and they sit down, they're still having a cigarette, and they go, can you help me with it?
Sure, it depends.
Perhaps in the past, right? Yeah. So can you help me with it? It's sort of like, well, how sincere is the person? Is any help you're going to give them going to be of much benefit to them when they're like that? But if they have already investigated the damage smoking does to themselves, and they've already, you know, tried to do things like, you know, getting their cigarettes, getting rid of all their cigarettes, never buying another packet, and they've already tried to do some sort of other things to help them, like maybe they're even just popping lollies instead of cigarettes, well, that's not a very good thing. Get rid of that too, right? Because any substitute is just going to be a substitute.
That's where the deprivation becomes an issue for me, though.
That's right. Well, it's not bad to deprive you if your motivation is to get deeper.
Okay.
Yeah. But if it's just to control the problem, then it's not going to control the problem. To control the problem, you got to get rid of its cause.
No, I say the deprivation right now is exacerbating the pain.
Well, often it is. Yeah. Often it will, and because it's not dealing with the cause.
And it's a lack of care for yourself. It's like it's a sort of self-punishing act.
Yeah.
And that's always going to create more pain. Self-punishment.
Yeah. Yep. So depriving yourself for the sake of helping you learn, well, that's different than as Mary said.
Depriving yourself kind of in their self.
Yeah, I think I'm actually making that shift.
Yep.
I'm in the midst of making
You're in
that
the midst
shift.
of making that shift, yeah, I'd say. And yes, so educate yourself more about your emotions. That's the most powerful thing you can do. And if you ask for God's help and some spirit help to do it, they'll help you out. like within probably, it took me about a year, I suppose, of doing that. And a year sounds a long time, but in the course of your life, it's like nothing really. In about a year, I could understand most of the emotions on that sheet, on the printouts. I could understand this is what that feels like, this is what that feels like. I'm still to this day having problems with some, in the sense of particularly ones that are good emotions. But all of the negative ones I understand pretty well now.
And you don't,
And I understand
you feel
what I
them,
feel.
you're not blocked to feel them.
Yeah, not blocked to feeling, not scared of them, not frightened of them, feel them pretty easily. And some of the positive ones I'm still working on now, like in terms of what to do. But that was like, when I did that, it was 25 years ago when I did that. And within the first year, I came to understand and feel almost all of the different types of negative ones, except the ones associated with who I was. That took me 7 years to do that. And then after that, it was good. I can feel almost everything then. Yeah. For you won't have that problem. You'll find, and most people who do this won't have that problem. They'll be able to feel it fairly consistently. There's no major things stopping you from feeling any one of the emotions, really. When I say major things, like, psychologically major things. And so if you're diligent, you'll be able to get to feel the emotions, probably most of them within a year. Yeah. 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 Now, initially, what happens is the emotions you feel the most are the ones that are hard. Because they're the ones, and there's a good reason for that, which I probably need to explain. One is the reason why you feel the worst emotions first, or the worst types of emotions first, is because they are the most dominant. So let's say you have times in your past of joy, not very many, I know.
No, it gets squashed pretty easily.
Yeah, so let's say you do have some joy in your life, but that's how much joy you've had, right? And let's say, some other emotion like fear you've had has been there, right? Naturally, when you start identifying emotion and feeling that, the ones that are the most prevalent within you are the ones you're going to feel first, if you're sincere. So that means you'll feel the negative ones first, before you feel the positive ones. So this is something I noticed myself. It took me probably solid 8 months of feeling the negative ones before I started feeling any positive ones. And I remember one of the times, I think I've described this in other videos, where I was driving down, I was getting some help from a person who was doing body work, and I was driving down to see him, and I'd go there 2 days a week, and he'd just press certain parts of my body, he wouldn't say anything. And certain parts of your body store emotion, and because I was more open to feeling what the emotions felt like, I'd go through the emotions. But I remember after doing this for some time, it's nearly 8 months, I was driving down to see him, and I go, I can see colour. It feels strange. Like I've actually felt some feelings of joy just going down to see him. But before it was all like, what's going to happen now? Like that kind of thing. But I actually felt some joy, and that was a very new experience for me because I hadn't felt it for such a long time. And I realised, here's a benefit to opening up emotionally, which I hadn't experienced before. It took me quite a long time to get to that stage where I could actually feel there was a benefit to it. Yeah. So that's one thing to just be aware of. You're going to feel the more painful ones first, obviously. Not the most painful ones, but the more painful emotions have a habit of swamping any good, joyful emotions. Makes sense? So it's the painful ones you will feel first, but you won't feel the most intense ones first because you can't handle it yet. Right? You'll feel the less intense ones first, but because they swamp any joyful emotions, you'll find that's what you're going to have first, most probably. And that's the case for everybody pretty much on Earth. Yeah. So that's what needs to happen.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Hopefully you go ahead and do that.
I'm going to. That's right.
Yeah. And the beauty of doing this yourself is you learn a lot about yourself. You learn to understand yourself. You learn your personality and nature through this process. You learn a lot about yourself that you wouldn't otherwise know. And also, it's very rare that any therapist would tell you to do these things, because most therapists are trying to avoid their own emotion through therapy, through helping others. And so they're not very open to a person going to this depth dealing with their emotion. You follow?
Yeah.
There is a poor amount of education on the earth about emotion, and most therapists enjoy using intellectual constructs to try to detune you from emotion rather than feel it, right? Because that's really what they want for themselves, to have a detunement of their emotion as well. So I did find one man in my whole history of doing this, when I did this for about 2 years fairly regularly, and then the next year on and off sort of thing. And after the third year, I found nobody could help me anyway. So, because I was too connected to my emotion, far more connected to my emotion than they were to theirs. So it didn't take very long to get more connected than anybody I met. I did try to find some people, but I couldn't find anybody after that. And then I just had to rely on myself and my relationship with God to get me through the rest. But what I found was in that experience that the average person who actually says they are therapists helping people work through an emotion actually have a strong desire to avoid their own emotion. And after I saw that, I thought, well, a person who's got a strong desire to avoid their own emotion can't help me with mine. Yeah. And that helped me understand that once I understood that as well. It was very good. Had a lot more confidence in myself and God. God's truth about emotion. God created all of you to be able to experience every emotion. And in my life, I've gone through, in this life too, I've gone through all of my memories about my past life, so torture and abuse and all sorts of things that happened in the first century life. There were a number of times when I was almost tortured to death in the first century. One time when I was during that sort of 5 to 8, 9 year bracket where I was sort of, where my father was around and also those soldiers and everything. Another time when I was a teenager, a group of boys in Nazareth where I was growing up, and beat me badly, 14 boys. They were all upset with my father claiming I was the Messiah, and they just got into me about it, and they just beat me almost to death. And then when I was 19, I was tortured again to the point of almost dying, broken back, broken hips, broken legs, part of my face bitten off, by dogs, and dragged around on the back of behind a horse through the town square naked. Pretty bad experiences, and all of those emotions you can still feel them. Like, that's what I've learned. You can feel anything, yeah. And the power of that, once you can become that confident in your feelings, you'll find nobody is going to get you out of your feelings. Nobody is going to be able to manipulate your feelings. You are going to understand your feelings really, really well. And then when you have pure feelings for God and other things, you'll get instant responses from God because all your feelings are open. Yeah. It's a beautiful place to be. Yeah. What's the time?
10 past 4.
10 past 4. Okay. I think that's going to have to be our last question today. Makes sense to you though?
Yes, thank you very much.
This confidence in emotion is a part of God's standard of love, ironically. Right. It's loving for you to be fully responsible for your own emotion. It's an act of love to everyone else that you're fully responsible for your own emotion. It's an act of love to your soulmate that you're fully responsible for your own emotion. It's an act of love to your children that you're fully responsible to your own emotion. So this is one of God's standards of love, is that any time you are not fully responsible for your own emotion, you're actually putting your own emotion to somebody else. And then because of that, you're not living in harmony with love. So it's an act of love to be fully responsible, to feel your own emotion, no matter what they are. It also, the beautiful thing about that act is that it benefits you, obviously, firstly, but it also benefits everyone around you because they don't have to deal with your emotion anymore. You know, they don't have to deal with you dumping on them and getting angry and frustrated with them, and they don't have to deal with how negative you are and how down you are about everything, or they don't have to deal with sort of desires that are out of harmony with love or that are sinful. You know, so if you have you're not going to power trip over anybody anymore, because the majority of times that we do all these things is because we're avoiding an emotion, right? So you'll find that you also automatically become more loving because you no longer push your emotion or the need or have a need for other people to support your emotion in any way. And every emotion, that includes even things like doubt, and you experience them yourself. You don't dump them on anyone. So the beauty of that is you can end up having a relationship with God, and the person next to you completely says there's no such thing as God's existence anymore, and they don't believe in God at all, and they don't have any relationship with God at all, and you're fine with them feeling that way because you know what you feel, and you understand your own feelings, and you understand the strength of them. And it's very nice having that confidence. It's very important in a relationship to have that confidence too, if you think about it. Because quite often the persons we so-called love the most, we let influence us the most. Right? And that's not good for us, because if you don't stay true to your emotions and your feelings, you're not going to, once you receive God's standard of love and also God's truth, you're not going to stay true to that truth if you're worried about what the other person's feeling, right? Another advantage is when the other person's feeling things, you don't feel you need to rescue them. You don't feel guilty, or you don't feel like, I need to come to your rescue, I need to do something to help you prevent your emotions, right? So when I'm feeling emotion, Mary, she can just eat and drink and watch telly, whatever she wants to do. Right? Go off and see somebody. It's not going to bother me, whatever she does. I don't need her to experience my emotion with me, because I know, and particularly for someone who's not your soulmate, you know they can't even share it with you. But someone who is, it's unloving for me to share my harmed emotion, my painful emotions with Mary. Like, she's going to have her own pain to deal with. I don't want to have to load her up with mine as well. You follow? So, you also start to actually be able to love people in your life better, because you're not dumping your emotion on them so much. You're not wanting them to agree with you all the time, wanting them to feel along with you all the time, feel the same things as you all the time. You don't want any of that anymore, because you want them to have their own experience. When you become confident with your own emotional experience, you'll also desire other people to become confident with theirs. Yeah. So there's lots of advantages. Fear and emotion, is a big thing on this earth, isn't it? Yeah. We won't be able to answer any more questions now, though. Let's have a wait for tomorrow's 5 hours to do that. And tomorrow we would like to talk a bit more about God's standard of love in some practical areas. So what we want to do tomorrow is we want to start introducing God's standard of love in spiritual areas and emotional areas, sexual areas and physical areas. And we just want to give some examples. And so we'll do that in the morning, hopefully in the first hour. And then we'll leave it open again to your questions on those subjects. And during that, we also would like to talk a bit more to spirits who are here as well. Because what we've been trying to do is help the spirits who come to these events as well as the people. So we'll do a bit of that. And then on Sunday, we're thinking, depending on how we feel, we're thinking that it'll be a sort of whole spirit discussion day, probably, similar to how we did
In Denmark.
in England. Because that was also beneficial to people on earth relating to the things that were going on. Yeah.
Everyone feels like they got a bit down about that whole discussion
Yeah.
about
Emotions, yeah.
emotion. Wow.
Very depressed about it.
Not everyone, but yeah.
For many of you, very depressed about it, like having to feel your own emotion.
Do you feel hopeless, some of you, about getting to that?
Mm.
Yeah.
Got to be more honest.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Yeah, maybe I want to raise up let's say a positive emotion issue. So a couple of weeks ago, I went to
yeah,
we
can't do more questions.
okay.
We're just
Not
talking
now.
about the response.
We're just talking about the response of the audience.
Yeah.
Many of you want to have good feelings. This is what we feel from you. You want good feelings, good feelings, good feelings. You do not understand that your desire for good feelings and your desire to avoid bad ones is causing a lot of your negative spirit attractions. Because that's what spirits that are earthbound want as well. They want only good feelings, only good feelings, only good feelings. And so when you want good feelings and you want to avoid your bad feelings, and they want good feelings and they only want to avoid their bad feelings, you've got a codependence now developing between you and those kind of spirits, trying to cheer you up, trying to keep you positive, trying to keep you motivated, trying to keep you, in a positive zone. And the problem with that is that you're not going to deal with your bad feelings. And one of God's laws says you have to deal with all feelings in order to actually feel. So you're actually working in complete disharmony with how your soul works. Right? Your soul is being designed to feel feelings. And if you shut down feelings, you're going to cause disease. You're going to cause suffering if you shut down feelings. So most of you go, but I only want to talk about the good things. I only want to talk about the good things. And we go, no, we need to talk about your sin. The bad things, because it's the bad things that are causing most of your pain. And we would like to see you happier. So we need to talk about those things. Not a personal experience?
No.
Just then you're telling us like these emotions and then talk to God about them, and I'm just so going, it's the spirit's going on the third, not God, and then you're in that deluded state, and
We can talk about all that
Let's
tomorrow.
talk about that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Have your feeling
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
it.
Well, I feel that's what I'm convinced it's God, but then I think I do with the.
Yeah, well, this is one reason why, and this was the case also in the last all the groups we've been to so far actually, that people are thinking they're connecting to God, but actually a lot of times their emotional state is, I want to avoid my bad feelings, I want to get good feelings. How do I do that? How do I sort of circumvent God's laws to get that happening? And
and
it doesn't work.
it doesn't work. And if you think about Robert's question, he's very honest about emotion,
Yep.
And
which is what is required to start feeling emotionally. You need to be honest about it.
exactly. Lots of people are actually in exactly the same state internally.
Yeah.
And you can see that if we really sit with that feeling and go, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Jesus has said it's humility that's the way, and that seems right, and it seems to be working for him, and but I feel so blocked to emotion. There's lots of feelings that come up about that, isn't there? You can feel hopeless or depressed or, angry, which is, about well, how do I get to this feeling state? And you can see, if you go back to Tim's example, when there's something inside of you, say, I feel like emotion is bad, or I am actually an atheist, but I want to feel like I'm getting somewhere, I want to have good feelings. This is what creates the confusion with the spirits and God.
Yeah.
But
I feel I'm feeling emotions, like the bad emotions, sometimes, releasing stuff and.
But a lot of times when you're in a codependent addiction with spirits, they will only let you release the bad emotions that give them a closer bond with you. And they will not let you deal with the emotions that would further remove them from you. Right? So there's all these dangers that come about from avoiding pain. And that's one of the dangers. One of the dangers is they'll let you deal with things that make you feel more strength and bond with them. But when it comes to dealing with the things that are actually going to break that bond, where you become more self-sufficient and more self-aware, they don't want that. And if you become aware of them around you, they don't want that either. So it's sort of like they want you to be aware enough where they can have more influence over your life, but not quite aware that you're living your own life. Right? And this is what creates a lot of confusion in people when they start processing through things emotionally. In addition to that, you've also got the desire to stay in tantrums, which has a powerful effect on spirits, because spirits who are already in a tantrum go, yeah. The false faith we have, the corrupt faith that we have, like the corrupt faith that feeling emotions is hard, or you shouldn't have to feel fear, or these kind of corrupt faiths. If you have them and you start feeling them, but not in a tantrum way, not in a real way, then the spirits go, yeah, I agree with that too. Yeah, let's go down that track, and let's be angry with God about that, and let's be. So many of you don't realise it, but you feel angry with God, and you feel angry about hearing the truth. Even sometimes, a lot of times, you feel angry about hearing the truth. Some people have even said to us, it's so bad that we've heard the truth now. Like now we can't avoid our problems so much. Like now it's like every time, that truth comes back to me again. They feel very annoyed about even listening to truth even. And when you think about that, you can see straight away that that's tantrum, that's all. Because I don't want to face the truth, I don't want to hear it, and this is something we'd like to talk more with you about tomorrow, because if in a practical way you can start seeing hearing truth is good for you, feeling your emotions is good for you, getting out of spirit influence is good for you, getting away from, getting out of illusion and into reality from God's perspective, God's reality is good for you. And if you can come to that conclusion, then you'll be more motivated to live in harmony with God's standard of love rather than your own. Yeah.
Something that our friend John said to us last night was about, we were just asking him about what might be most helpful for you guys as a group, as a collective. And one of the things he said to me was about helping you guys to see what's ahead of you spiritually, what needs to be done, and obviously these things are things that need to be looked at. Like, what's the real thing that I need to do to have this ongoing relationship with God? And that's why we're talking about a lot of these things today, because these are things that as a group, there's commonalities with this spirit influence, with this confusion between God and spirits, and getting real about what's really inside of me and what are my real beliefs that are blocking that real relationship. So, yeah.
So we'll do that tomorrow, huh?
Yeah, we'll talk more about it.
So let's finish for today.
Yes, I do know. So just a couple of people asked about the donation box. Thank you, anyone who would like to donate. It's just the red box there beside the door as you go out.
Yeah. Anything else?
No.
11 o'clock start tomorrow morning.
At 11 tomorrow morning.
Yeah. Good night.
Thank you. Thanks for your
Jesus, can I just, do you prefer cash or transfer?
We probably prefer transfers, if you can do transfers rather than cash. It's just harder for us to carry cash.
Exactly.
So transfers would be preferred. Thank you. Donate.divinetruth.com.
Yes.
Yeah.